what's up, guys? Welcome to Bada Boom. This is the first time me and Troy have been on a podcast video in a minute. Actually, we recorded something really fun just a minute ago that you guys will see in a few, but it's been good. Troy has made a big move, but bigger moves at Bada Boom and also bigger moves at Rotten Tomatoes. So let's dive right into it.
Yeah, man. Do you think Rotten Tomatoes is kind of overrated? I guess is like the main topic we're going to be talking about. How much do you trust it, really?
Well, I mean, the topic is coming up, and the reason we wanted to talk is that there was a big Vulture article talking about how a particular PR firms and generally PR firms in general manipulate Rotten Tomatoes, especially that score, and how they at times flat out pay people for reviews or stagger the release of certain reviews to have a more favorable rating. And I think it has gotten to the point where it is overweighted in terms of moviegoers' decision making. They immediately see that score and decide whether they're going to go or not. And I think it also weighs on other people's opinions about certain movies. Sometimes they see it's rotten and they're like, I can't say I like this movie because everyone else hates it. When I saw this article, it wasn't much of a surprise, but I think it definitely confirms a lot of people's conspiracy theories about Rotten Tomatoes when it comes to studios paying for good press, good coverage. And I think it has become something way too easy to game. The system is a little weird in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I know like Rotten Tomatoes at one point in time, it's still owned by Fandango, which is owned by Universal. And that kind of seems a little bit like, how is that fair? The people that make the movies.
Yeah, I think it's owned by one of the studios. I'm not sure if it's Universal, but it is kind of crazy. And then also, if you think about it, when it comes to Rotten Tomatoes, who's spending the ad dollars? The studios.
Yeah.
They have their own, publication where they promote movies and stuff like that. So you're like, wait, is this fair and balanced?
Yeah, and I think like that's like the circle of companies. Eventually they say, oh, we see someone else is making money on something we do. How do we make that money ourselves? And then now it's just like, oh, it might be like too big to fail kind of situation at the end. But I don't know, man. Like, I feel like until reading this article, I was pretty trusting of Rotten Tomatoes, not because I thought like, oh, every review on there is like as accurate or is written by like such a noteworthy critic, but just of like, if a lot of people think they like it, that's great. But just because those people like it doesn't mean I'm not going to like it, and vice versa. So I really kind of just ignored it and would just be like, if it already confirms my bias of liking it, even better. If it doesn't, I'm still probably going to see it. I'll make my own choice afterwards.
Like most data points, if it supports your argument, it's right.
Exactly. And that's the vibe, because like Blue Beetle, I know we talked about that for a little bit. It was like certified fresh by audiences. We're like, yeah. And then we saw
finally.
it.
Yeah, and then we saw it, But, again, what's really good about the article, they dive deep into some of the details in terms of like what these PR firms do, and one example they used was in particular Ant-Man and the Wasp in Quantumania. They talked about how, and listen, we have a podcast. We're fans. Most of this is weighted towards comic book things. And granted, we haven't liked much of it lately.
We didn't even do an episode on Ant-Man.
Yeah. But, it's one of those things where they talked about how the PR for that particular film made sure that a lot of publications that were more geek and fan owned saw the movie first, and those reviews came out first. And if you saw, the movie was fresh at one point, at the reveal. And then as the movie came out, audiences saw it, it went into the rotten territory, which shows how easily you can manipulate it, because it's like, hey, if you only screen it for a certain group of critics that already are predisposed to like the film, you're getting a good review. And then another thing the article talks about is flat out, like they use an example of a Daisy Ridley film where the reviews weren't great. They were flat out bad. So, listen, they're a PR firm, so this is what they're going to do.
Yeah, they're going to make sure. Look good.
So, they reach out to some critics, some reviewers, seeing if they'd be willing to publish reviews on it. And it's really cheap, 50 a pop. You know what I mean? Like, hey, if it's like that, But one thing I will say is that I don't want this article to say like, hey, every review needs to be called in question. The system as a whole is flawed because even for people that are genuinely giving their own opinion, and Paul Schrader, who wrote Taxi Driver, is a legendary filmmaker, talked about, how they don't really respect reviews anymore because even when they do get a review that's interesting, like someone being like, hey, I don't know if I really liked it, but it was okay and stuff like that, that they had, some conflicting views around it. That itself in itself counts as a rotten review, even though it wasn't a bad one. So it's just such a weird and binary system, whether it's like, hey, this is good or bad. There's no like middle ground.
Yeah, and I feel like we overall do put too much of an emphasis on Rotten Tomatoes for how great a movie is going to be. I remember we were like kids, there would be like this article saying, 5 out of 5 stars. Rolling Stone says this, and
Oh, Peter Travers at Rolling Stone, man, he has. I mean, if it's $50 a review to get his like 5 stars was probably like at least like 20K or something. Even
yeah,
though he used to give those out like like
yeah, yeah,
water.
exactly. And now you're like, whenever you see a commercial for a movie, it's like only Rotten Tomatoes is the source you're quoting. So it's like, I feel like we put way too much emphasis on it, and there's not a diverse enough audience of critics when people are presented this information in the trailers to be like, oh yeah, more than one group says this is good. I'll probably go see it. You know?
And what the difference is that people used to value individual critics' voices, And I think now, and this is not just a movie problem, this happens in games, like culture in general, like it's become like a big groupthink and mass opinion where it's like, hey, everyone says this is ass, so it's ass. Everyone says this is great, so it's great. There's no middle, like no, like hey, this was okay, but I wish they would approach this a little bit differently. There's no nuance where people could go to like a Roger Ebert and read the review and be like, oh, like that's an interesting point. I don't necessarily agree with it. Now it's whether, hey, it's great or not. And, you could go on for days where these problems come from. One, not investing in journalism. You shouldn't have people who interview people, write reviews and all that, doing all those jobs at the same time because hey, they'll probably be good at one or the other, not all of them.
Yeah, it's tough to get all three.
Yeah, and it creates this rush too. And speaking of those quotes you talked about, because of the nature of social media, commercials, advertisements, there's a lot of critics that rush to be that quote on the poster.
Yeah.
To be that, hey, this is the best movie since, oh, best movie of the year, all those things. So, as much as the article focuses on Rotten Tomatoes, and I think a lot of the discourse is around like, hey, this is rigged and all that, it really is the system as a whole. And I think there's a big problem. There's very few people that you could name, like there's a Roger Ebert, but is there, the Times wrote an article about like TikTok film people, and it wasn't the most favorable. And it just goes to show you there really isn't like one voice that really you could go to and be like, hey, like if I'm looking for some real film criticism, this is the person I'm going to. I'm sure they exist. And again, I'm making a mass general statement, but there isn't one at the level of a Roger Ebert. You waited for that review.
Yeah. One thing I did like that they talked about at the end of the article is about how certain movies will do kind of better performance wise depending on the score. Obviously, like that's a very general statement, but like for example, horror movies, if it's like in the 50%, people will probably take a chance on it more than they will some movie about like a widow that's like in the same rating era. Because
yeah, no one's saying a World War II movie in the 40s on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, like, there's so many people expect some horror movies just to tank, and if it's like 50%, they're like, "Hey, that's good enough for me. I'm going to go see it because it's just going to have something, I don't know, worth watching in the end, or be some sort of fun, and that you can laugh at. Like, you can laugh at how bad it is, but you can't do that for every film."
No, and it doesn't work for, and I think that goes to like marketing. I think sometimes they use this blanket thing of to market all films, but not you shouldn't market a horror movie the same way you'd market a big superhero movie. And also same thing with like you're seeing with the actors and writer strike. There are certain movies like you look at an Equalizer 3, it broke every record that franchise has had, and the star of the movie can't do interviews. So, and then also too, like the whole year, all these sequels have been bombing, or these big tent poles, and then the Equalizer 3 out of nowhere just gets a bunch of money. And I'm sure I haven't looked at the Rotten Tomato score, but I'm sure it's not 100. So there's these things that I think they use and put a big emphasis on, and they try to game the system when in reality, big picture, it doesn't mean much.
Yeah. I mean, I just pulled up the Equalizer score and it is 75% on the tomato meter. There's 118 reviews. And then for the audience score, 94%, but there's over 1,000 views. So
That's pretty good. I got to go see the Equalizer 3.
I mean, I gotta watch the first two, but then I'll see the third.
Right. Now, I'm going to be honest. I really didn't like the first one. The second one was okay, but as a dad now, I'm legally obligated to like those type of movies. So I'll go see it again, despite me not loving the first one. And the second one, I thought it was a bit of an improvement. But what do you guys think? Rotten Tomatoes is something we obviously all use, especially when it favors our point. But now with the transparency that this article has given us in terms of like what those scores mean and how that system is gamed, what do you guys think? Let us know. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And with that, bada boom.
Bada boom.